Welcome, everybody. Happy Tuesday. This is the 101st episode of Let's Do Lunch. And we have a really cool show on today, and I'll introduce our panelists in just a minute. But as a reminder, we'll have our chat open. In fact, it's open right now. So feel free to post a little bit about yourself, make introductions, and you can post comments at any time throughout the show in the chat that's on the bottom nav. Also, when you do that, make sure, as Laura just posted, to select all panelists and attendees in the dropdown so that everybody can see your post. Otherwise, the default is set to panelists and it just goes to the panelists. If you have questions for the panel, and they're happy to take all questions, please put them in the Q&A, which is just to the left of the chat, and that'll be easier for our panelists to see the questions. Today we have a full panel, and let me just say that I guess it's 35 days out from the election. Tonight is our first presidential debate, and we're going to tackle the topic of the entertainment industry, the election, voting, a whole range of topics. This is not a shy group. I want to first bring on Jordan Kurland. He's founding partner of Brilliant Corners Artist Management, and Jordan can introduce our panel, which he helped to put together today. So Jordan, please join us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your day and spending close to an hour with us. As Ned said, my name is Jordan Kerland. I'm a partner in an artist management company called Brilliant Corners. We work with a number of artists, including Death Cab for Cutie, the Postal Service, Soccer Mommy, Tori Moi, New Pornographers, Best Coast, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I had emailed over the idea for this panel just as a way, as we are entering, or we have been in crunch time around the election for a little while now, but since we're in crunch time, I wanted to bring together some friends and a really great inspirational group of people who are all doing various things around the election to give some, you know, advice, tips, etc., about how we can all make an impact. And, you know, tonight is the first presidential debate. We're 35 days from the election, believe it or not. Feels like this election cycle has been going on for 18 years or something like that, but just a little bit over a month left. So I'm going to start by introducing the other panelists. Binta, if you'd please join. And Genevieve Roth. Kathryn. And Andy Bernstein, the founder of HeadCount. So you know, for starters, why don't you guys go around and just say, you know, do a quick introduction about, you know, as to who you are and the work you're doing around the election. And that would be great. Binta, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Binta Brown. I am an artist manager and music executive. And I'm going to embrace that I'm also an activist. I had the great fortune of knowing Jordan through work. Through work. Our artists have collaborated with each other in the past, which has been super fun. But about the election, you know, there are a couple of things I'm doing. One is I'm just, you know, trying to use, you know, my platform and access as much as possible to encourage other people to get active and to be involved and to be engaged. To see this as not just as a fight to defeat one person, but a fight for humanity and a fight for life, because those are the terms in which I see it. So whether it's as a volunteer for the campaign, as a volunteer surrogate for the campaign, or through my work as a co-founder of the Black Music Action Coalition, which has been working on Get Out the Vote efforts throughout the summer and continues to work on Get Out the Vote efforts. Those are the ways that I've been mostly involved. And also just trying to be a good niece and daughter and sister and encourage all my family to do what they're supposed to do.
Thank you. Genevieve, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, y'all. I am Genevieve Roth, and I am the founder of a social impact culture change agency called Invisible Hand. I ran creative engagement for Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. Previously, I'd been in media for a really long time, and then went and ran creative engagement in 2016. That's where Jordan and I met each other. I founded Invisible Hand. It's sort of predicated on what I learned about how to connect culture and music and musicians and actors to the political process on the campaign, and now have this company. We consult to the campaign, so working on this cycle as well around, you know, how we use the tools of culture to try to spin the world forward and hopefully get it done this year.
Thank you. Kathryn?
Hi, I'm Kathryn Schotthoefer. My background is in film and television with traditional film and TV companies like Fox and Warner Brothers and New Line. About 6 years ago, I transitioned my career to focus more on finding ways to open pathways into the industry for creators from all backgrounds and from all over the world. So I have a company called Original Media Ventures where we do that through investment, technology, education. And I'm an advisor to Plus One, and Plus One focuses on pairing grassroots nonprofits with touring musical artists and other entertainment companies, brands, artists that want to use their platforms for good and want some support in figuring out what the best way is to do that.
Thank you. And last but not least, Andy. And Andy, when you finished talking, what I would love for everybody, and we could start with you, Andy, after you introduce yourself, but just, you know, one thing you would suggest that people can do these last 35 days as we head into the election? What you think I don't want to say the most important, but what are one of the vital things?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm Andy Bernstein. I'm the executive director of HeadCount. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit, been around since 2004, doing voter registration and turnout work primarily through music space. So in a normal year, we're out at anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 events, running voter registration drives and GeoTV. This year, we obviously have to pivot to all digital, but it's actually been our best year ever. We're probably going to register north of 250,000 voters and generate about 2 million voter actions. And so it's, you know, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And for us, being able to get really creative in the digital space actually was very fruitful. You know, I think in terms of impact, a lot of it has to do with sort of where your circle of impact is. I think for people who work in the media industry, it makes sense to look way beyond yourself and look at how your platforms and your companies are leveraging, you know, their reach, and whether that's you know, direct digital and very powerful tools like social media and text and email and all these things. We worked with different brands, and I think we've had probably over 25 million direct call to action emails sent. And while email is a little bit traditional, it still actually works. And text works even better. So I think anytime we're talking to a media audience, I think about, you know, professionally how you can leverage these things. And that's something that we really focused on as an organization this year, was working with, we probably had well over 50 brand partners doing meaningful things. And that's where a lot of the registrations came from. Spotify was our biggest partner, but we had many, many others. And I think that anybody with access to digital media can make a big difference in this election.
Thanks, Andy. Genevieve, do you want to, I'm just going to work backwards. I think, am I working backwards? Maybe not. I'm working backwards from how I'm seeing my screen. So why don't you, if you could say, you know, just a little advice on what you feel like is something viewers can do down the stretch as we lead into the election.
Yeah, happily. I would +1 to everything that Andy says in terms of like really understanding what that sphere of influence would be. So one of the things that I learned, after 2016 when we lost, and Jordan, you would remember this, I went into a little bit of a cave about trying to contemplate how was it that we could have had, by all accounts, the sort of most effective creative engagement campaign in the history of the game. More celebrities, more concerts, more activations, and have the result that we had. And I'm not drawing a direct correlation between like how many Beyonce concerts we stood up and whether we won or lost, but it did lead me to believe that we fundamentally misunderstood the connection between culture and actual activity. So I went into this like really dark cave. I read and studied every single sort of surrogate and creative thing back to like Hayward. And what I landed on in the end is something that we probably already knew, which is that we make decisions based on information that feels really proximate to us and that feels really authentic. And so there is a function and a role for marquee and bully pulpit activations, right? But that for most of us, our path to light is in the most proximate and intimate conversation that we can have. And that's true both in what, in sort of campaign speak, we would call like persuasion universe. And just for our friends out here, like this is not a persuasion election. In most elections, you think we have maybe like 6 or 7% of the electorate whose mind you could change of the likely voters. In this election, we think that is at best about 3%. We're in a really divided space. But it's mostly true both in persuasion activities and then also in what we, enabling the vote and registering to vote and what have you. I'm more likely to do the thing you tell me to do. If I trust you, if I feel like I know you, if you feel like you have authentic permission. So there's two pieces of advice in that. One is don't discount what you can do within the 6 feet in front of you to your family and friends. That's like wildly important. And second of all, spend your time thinking about what are the audiences I have the most permission to be in front of, or that my networks or my bands or my what have you have the most authentic permission to be in front of, and play there. Because that's where I think you're gonna see all the good work.
Thank you. Kathryn.
Okay, I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. One, this election, and one, all elections. I think one of the interesting things that happens in our industry is that some of the same qualities that build success in creative fields, like being a champion of your own ideas and creativity for creativity's sake, those are things that can make you successful in creative fields. They're also the things that can make you a less productive partner when it comes to working with organizers and people who are doing get out the vote work. And, after the 2016 election, we got inundated with people saying, I have an idea and here's the thing I want to do. And, we'd tell them, hey, there's like 9 other people that are already doing that. Let's join forces and work together. And some people said, great, we're in. And other people were like, no, this is my idea. I need to own it. I would say one of the things that the people that are, part of this group and part of this audience can really do is think about what are the ways that you leverage what you have to get behind people that are doing the work, who have the deep knowledge, the organizers who have been doing this work and have the expertise. 35 days down is not the time to try to reinvent a new thing, with no input from people who really, really know what they're doing. And so if anyone needs help with doing that, call us at +1, we can help. Otherwise, there's some great people on this call that can help with it. But, really focusing on putting all of our energies behind people with that deep knowledge and those deep working relationships and community. The other thing that I will say, again, knowing who's on this call in the audience, there's people here who come from tech platforms, who are from ad tech, who are from buyers. What social media looks like has a direct influence over the integrity of our elections. And we've seen what that's done in this cycle, and we will see what that continues to do in future cycles. And some of you are in a real position to start to influence social media platforms to hold themselves more accountable for, holding themselves to, integrity. And so I would really think about that as we go forward, through this election and beyond. What are the ways that you can hold your partners at some of those platforms accountable?
Thank you. Binta.
I agree with everything that I've heard from everyone so far, which is perhaps not a surprise. When I kind of pick on a couple of themes, the personal is important, you know, to Genevieve's point. And so in terms of direct what you can do if you're not doing it already, is every day think of 5 people and ask them if they've registered to vote. You know, ask them if they have a plan to vote. Tell them what you're doing to vote. That I think is incredibly important, and it matters, you know. And if you are a person who is blessed to have and here's the reality: every single person who's on social media, whether you have 10 followers or 10 million followers, you have a platform. And you have people who are following and engaging and looking at what you're saying. And so let's use our platforms for the common good. Let's use our platforms to articulate messages and to encourage one another to participate in this system that belongs to all of us. Not just some of us, or a portion of us, or some of us sometimes, but it belongs to all of us all of the time. So to use your voices. And the reason why I reference social media is because in this era of dislocation and isolation and separation, it's what we have. You know, I am unfortunately 800 miles away from my closest friends and family. And it'll need to remain that way until it becomes safer to move about. And so, you know, social media is a key tool for me to reach people instead of knocking on doors. The second thing that I would say is for us to listen to one another with compassion and without judgment. You know, I had a really beautiful conversation with somebody yesterday where I couldn't really understand, you know, I am passion and heart and intellect is the way I'm mind and heart. That's who I am. And so, you know, I can be really passionate about what my mind knows. And I can also be really passionate about the truth and I know this about myself. And so it's about being self-aware in terms of how we talk about people too, is that I can be intolerant of people who are not speaking from a truthful place. And so I had this beautiful conversation with a colleague and dear friend yesterday, because I couldn't understand why he was coming to the defense of a segment of the population that is not just getting on board with the election, and like, and whose best interest it is to get on board and to be for my candidate. I'm going to be partisan. So you know, and you know, I sat and I listened to him and I realized, oh, the messages aren't getting through, and there's a reason why the messages aren't getting through. So I think it's really important to us, or really important to democracy, that we not just be so vigilant in articulating the truth that we stop hearing people. Because when we stop hearing people, we incapacitate the possibility of the message getting through. And the messages haven't been getting through broadly enough. And it can really hurt us. We all of us right now, as Americans, have so much anger and frustration. And I think one of the greatest dangers of anger and frustration is that it can cause us to shut down. And it can cause communication to shut down. And so finding ways to move past that anger and that frustration, to really open our hearts to listen, as we engage with 5 people each day, I think that's what takes us through the election. And hopefully people are already voting, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about kind of listening without judgment in this election cycle. You know, more people didn't vote than voted for Clinton or Trump. And in this election, a really good outcome for either candidate would be to get 1/3 of Americans, eligible Americans, to vote for them. So whatever side one might be on an election, 2/3 of America disagrees with you. And if you think that you're so right and 2/3 of everybody else is wrong and out to lunch and are just idiots or immoral, well, you know, the kind of numbers speak for that there's something not right there. And I think one of the disconnects and one of the problems with voter turnout is we're so factional as a country that we've stopped listening to each other, and people are also feel very ill-equipped to have the conversation. One of the things that HeadCount is rolling out this week is a landing page, a kind of microsite that's about how to talk to friends who don't vote. Because in a country where not voting is the most popular choice compared to either candidate, everyone has friends who don't vote. And the tendency can be to scold rather than have a really open conversation. And I'll throw it in the chat. This is something we did, basically because studies say that friends and family are more influential than anyone, more influential than Beyonce or anyone else. And we want to help equip people for those difficult conversations. So I'll throw that in the chat.
We have to make people feel like they're included, and I think that that's one of the things that we haven't done as well. I think that we get so, to Genevieve's point about, does Beyonce necessarily influence millions of people who haven't voted before to vote, or such and such other celebrity? No, like what I think is going to influence people to vote is creating not just a perception, but a feeling of you're not excluded from the system. And that's a very difficult thing to do when millions of people in our country have been excluded and have been left out. And we have to understand that that's part of what's going on with people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to build on that, how do you guys feel, so many people are despondent about the state of our country and feel powerless, feel like their vote doesn't count. And, obviously, that's maybe a strategy from, one side of this to keep people from voting. I mean, how do we reinforce the fact that we all can make a difference and we can all, our votes do count? I mean, I really feel like, apathy is so prevalent in regards to our political system right now. So I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts about, these next 35 days is getting as many people to vote as possible. How do we tackle that, which I see as one of the biggest barriers to people voting?
Well, I have to say, I think, Andy, what you said about this is so inspired in the sense that I really do believe it is about proximity, Jordan, and being in dialogue with people in a really close way and and figuring out how to be comfortable with that dialogue happening across difference, right? Like, how do we create a safe space to kind of make that? There's this really beautiful research that came out of after the election in 2016 by a woman named Arlie Hochschild, who was initially she was trying to understand the sort of psychology of the Tea Party voter. And then she went to understand what was happening in sort of with the Trump voter. And my biggest takeaway from it is that when you boiled it down to its empathetic base, right? Like, how are we feeling about what's happening in our country? They were the most relatable things in the entire world. It was fear. It was a want to protect the thing that you value the most in the world. It was love of family, love of history. And that if you could take away all of the things that made them feel divisive and scary, that's where you could really kind of make some headway with getting places with people, right? And to me, the greatest antidote for that level of despair and the division that people feel is that level of proximity. Because funnily, and also saying that, like, what Andy was saying about how if there's 2/3 of the country that disagree with you, there's also really interesting data that suggests that we tend to behave in ways that we think are consistent with what other people want us to do. But then when we actually get proximate, we are in way more agreement. And it sounds like the oldest thing in the book, but we're in way more agreement about the foundational things than we believe. And we just can't find that out because we feel so far away from one another.
But my question to that is, in Obama's, to paraphrase, Obama said it, if one person's watching Fox News and one person's listening to NPR, CNBC, it's like you're living on different planets. The problem, I went and look, I'll be partisan too. I'm doing everything in my power to get Trump out of office, right? And, you know, after the tax stuff broke, and Genevieve, you and I talked about this a little bit Sunday night, it's like, is that really going to have an impact? And so on Monday, you know, I don't, you know, I'm not very good about this. Like, I definitely pay attention to the outlets that reinforce my world view. But I went and looked at Fox News, and I looked at Wall Street Journal, you know, kind of more the right-leaning organizations, and they're either not even mentioned or non-stories. I mean, so how do you, you know, how do we get past that? And I do think that's where social media is, as much as it feels like you're screaming into the void when you post something, you know, just reinforcing to your community. And also, you know, over these next, you know, 5 weeks, making sure that accurate, vetted information gets out into the world, right? Because disinformation is a cornerstone of voter suppression, really, one of the cornerstones. So just really making sure that the stuff you're posting is accurate, I think is one of the most important things at this point. But anyway, I'm just curious, like, you know, we are such a divided country, and it's so, I mean, even for me, you know, I feel pretty bummed out about it a lot of the time, and just feel like, you know, you've got these 43% of people who are supporting Trump, and we're not gonna be able to move their opinion, you know, or we've got these 48% who are, you know, whatever it is, supporting Biden. Like, how do we, I don't know, how do we reach across the aisle, so to speak, you know? And it's not even about reach across the aisle. It's like, there's no beacon of truth, you know? There's nowhere where everyone can go and say, this is just a fact and not an opinion, because everything right now feels like, you know, even the most trusted news sources feel like they're coming through, you know, they're coming through with a tinge of opinion attached to them. So anyway, that was a little bit of a ramble, but like, how do we get beyond that? And how do we get, you know, it's, you know, how do we get people to feel like their voice is being heard and their vote is being heard, I guess, is what I'll boil this question down to, if anyone wants to grab it.
I dropped a link in the chat to something that Amanda Ripley wrote about complicating the narratives. And I think that that's an important thing for us to be thinking about, especially as we get closer to the election. And basically, you know, in our current world where everything is transmitted via soundbite and people get their news from memes, those things have to sit on, you know, one end of the spectrum or the other. But the reality is that our lives and the way that we think and look about a lot of the issues exist in that gray space in the middle. And it's in that gray space in the middle that when we start taking apart the issues, that we can find the places where we can relate to one another. And, you know, we may not be able to convince people to, you know, vote for Biden Harris for the same reasons we want them to, but we can be open to the things that would make them, you know, get out the vote and to vote for the candidates that we want them to vote for, you know, by being respectful and by listening to what their problems are. I mean, I will tell you, we spent 2 weeks ago, we drove from Los Angeles to Detroit, and we might as well have driven through 5 different countries in terms of what the media landscape looked like in each place that we went, what the issues were that we were seeing, what people were talking about, what they were, you know, who was on their hats, what was on the bumper stickers. And in some cases, those were in conflict, and in other cases, they weren't, but the message was different, the issues were different, and I think taking the time to listen and to think about what means something to someone without automatically saying, you're a terrible person, I think you're a terrible person, and let me tell you why you're a terrible person. That's not a message that's going to land with anybody. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing so much strength in some of these people who are crossover endorsements, like, you know, with the Sully endorsement today. You know, that's a big deal, because he's not someone who's been telling people for 4 years, you're an idiot for voting for Trump. But what he can say is, I know how to be a leader. You know, as a veteran, here are the things that I have learned, and here's why I'm making the choice to vote for Biden and Harris. You know, and I think that listening to people like that and amplifying some of what they're saying is also a way to help us reach across the aisle.
And if we make people feel like they're dumb or stupid, then they're much less likely to open themselves to hearing things that are factually accurate. And so listening is incredibly important. I also think that we have to look, you know, like we have to be sympathetic and understand that there's been not just, you know, the differences between, you know, a Fox or a CNN or an MSNBC, but also the information that gets pumped out through social media, through Twitter, those microbite headlines. They're so quick that that's how a lot of people get their information. And so, for example, in a conversation that I had with somebody yesterday, he said to me, he's like, well, Binta, Trump is the person who freed, you know, nonviolent offenders. And so as a result, my cousin and my brothers who were locked up, they're now on the streets. And I said to him, I said, did you also know that as soon as he signed the First Step Act, that in the first year of the First Step Act, he refused to fund it. In the second year, he called for less than an eighth of the funding that was required under the First Step Act. And I'm not sure if it actually was approved by Congress or not. And did you also know that he uses his Justice Department and his appointments, his judicial appointments, to further gut the act by reincarcerating those people who have been released? And he said, I didn't know that. And he also said, so he said, how do I know that you're right? Because I can see that my brother is on the street now again. Like I can see that he's out. That's what I can see. And that's what I can feel. And so we had a really good conversation because it really enabled us. Hi, Brian. It's been really too long. Wow, like that's a blast. Like it enabled me to see something that I wasn't seeing, which is that, we really have to be able to speak to each other super, super directly. But Jordan, I wanted to actually get back to the other question you asked about, and this is just in terms of us developing compassion as we're talking to people, because there are people who feel like their vote doesn't count because of what they've observed, whether it was Bush v. Gore, or whether it was Clinton v. Trump, and the outcomes ended up being inconsistent with what they know that they did and all of the voting problems that we've had. There are people who feel like their votes don't count just because they think, well, in a country of 300 million people, like what difference does my vote make? And there are people who think that it doesn't matter if they use their voices, if they express themselves through the vote, because they have been fundamentally and generationally excluded from our environment, whether it's the electorate, whether it's because of poverty, whether it's because of race, whether they're formerly incarcerated, whatever the reason is. We have a large segment of the population. So yes, there are the people who academically, they're like, well, not sure if my vote really counts because, there's so many of us. They're the people who are like, well, not sure if my vote counts because all I've seen is corruption in the American democratic process over the course of the last handful, with the exception of the Obama campaign. Like there have been so many abnormalities, if you will, like so many efforts to suppress the vote. And then that other group of people, it doesn't matter because I'm not part of this system. I'm here, but I've never been wanted, I've never been included, and I'm not part of the system.
No, absolutely. What do you guys think? I mean, we only have a few more minutes before we're going to open up to questions, and I'd love, Andy, if you could speak a little bit to how people can make sure their vote is counted.
It's a really important question. So one of our big concerns right now is the high rate of ballot rejection and vote by mail. And we've all been hearing the drumbeat since the start of COVID about vote by mail, and it's been highly politicized. And now there are surveys that Democrats are 4 times more likely to vote by mail than Republicans. And it's just simple math that if a sizable percentage of mail-in ballots are rejected, then it's going to have a significant partisan advantage. And people should know, I mean, this is what every American should know, is that millions and millions of mail-in ballots get rejected, and this is not a new thing. This year, though, it's higher than ever. New York State, it was 20%. There are a lot of reasons. It can be because of late arrival. It can be because of signature mismatch, which is a very daunting thing, because if your signature has changed over the years, your vote can be rejected. It can be about common errors that a small percentage of people make, like forgetting a stamp or using a check instead of filling in the bubble or things like that. But when you scale it over millions of people, it starts to be tens, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of votes. And when you think about, how close presidential elections have been, well, the election really can be decided on this. And there is a real chance that mail-in voting is going to backfire tremendously on Democrats, and that even without any interference or legal attempts to stop mail-in ballots from being counted, which will probably happen, that the election could turn on this. So we encourage everyone to inform themselves and their loved ones that if you are voting by mail, one, do it right away. Don't leave the opportunity for it to be too late, for the post office to deliver it late, and be just very careful with how you fill it out. There's a lot of ways you can mess it up, and if there's no partial credit in voting, if you make a mistake on your mail-in ballot probably won't count. And there's somebody who wants your mail-in ballot not to count based on who you vote for. So this is a real danger, because there's, we tend to have narratives take off, and they're very hard to turn. And the narrative among certain political beliefs is mail-in voting good and others mail-in voting bad. Well, it's not. It got politicized. The reality is, if you fill it out correctly, it's great. If you fill it out incorrectly, your vote's not going to count, and it's going to happen to millions of people. So this is a very real concern.
Where can people go to make sure that they're filling out their ballot correctly?
Well, the first thing is read your ballot carefully. On HeadCount.org, we have a lot of information, and we're actually improving it constantly. We're rolling out a section called Make Your Vote Count very soon, but the information is already on our site. It's different for every state. We've done a ton of research, and it gets down to other things that people should know is that in a lot of states you can track your ballot like you would an Uber or Domino's Pizza. And we have that information on our website and where you can do that. And it is different for all 50 states. So it's important, if you are going to vote by mail, just be very intentional about it. Be informed about what are, some states have signature match, some do not. That's really important information. But if you are concerned about voting by mail, which everyone should be, look into whether your state has early voting. About 20 states have true early voting, which means polling places open. You're not dealing with a mail-in ballot at all. A lot also have kind of where you can drop off your mail-in ballot in person or go in person and get a mail-in ballot. That solves some of the problems, but not all. But if you can vote early, if you are going to stores, if you are leaving your home, which most people are, voting early is definitely a more secure way to vote. And it's just something that people should be aware of. You got to cut through the politics. The politics have created this dichotomy of whether, voting by mail is some way to defy Donald Trump. Well, if you think that, realize that you are wrong. It is not a way to defy Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is against mail-in voting. It is actually, if you are planning to vote against Trump, well, think of it as maybe a 9/10 vote, because there's a 1 in 10 chance your ballot's going to get rejected. So people need to get away from that idea of how they vote is a statement, because we've gotten to that crazy place. I mean, we saw a major band calling on people to pledge to vote by mail. And I asked the manager, and I said, why did you do this? And he said, well, we have really, really top level consultants. They'd hired consultants from the Clinton campaign in 2016 who didn't catch this obvious mistake. And that's just really scary stuff, that the left took the bait. That's what I would say. They took the bait on vote by mail, and and then of course you have Trump signaling that they're going to do everything they can legally to stop mail-in votes from getting counted. And I think if after 3 days, if a winner isn't decided, what Trump and the Attorney General have signaled is they're going to do everything they can to call for stopping counting the mail-in ballots, which is similar to what happened in 2000 and resulted in the Supreme Court saying to stop counting the votes in Florida, and we got the result we did. So this is real, and this has happened before. So this is something everybody should be aware of.
Yeah, and this isn't, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't to say don't vote by mail. It's just saying for some people, it's going to be if it's the only option, vote by mail, double and triple check that you filled out your ballot correctly, and mail it early.
Yeah, I'll never use the word don't and vote in the same sentence. And it's tricky in terms of messaging, because I think that there's the real positive potential that the expansion of vote by mail is going to bring a lot of people into the system who wouldn't otherwise be. I mean, all mail-in vote states have higher voter participation. So you could have a really positive effect by the new popularity of vote by mail, is that people who wouldn't otherwise vote are voting. And so that's why we would never say voting by mail is a bad thing in any way. But if you are going to vote by mail, just understand the risks. And if you're very careful and you fill it out correctly, and you drop it off in person or you mail it very far in advance, that risk is greatly minimized. But if you're not very careful about it, or you wait until the final weeks, with a slow post office, then you're getting into a percentage risk where you're really not at 100%. And, when you consider that 20% of mail-in ballots were rejected in New York, 21%, I mean, this really happened, and it happened 3 months ago. So this stuff is real. It's not to be taken lightly.
Right. Thank you. So we do have a few questions, and we have about 10 minutes for questions if people want to, send a question in the question box. But how does the answer live? I don't know, panelists, I'm looking at a question from Judy Habas. Does everyone see that? If someone wants to grab that one, that would be great. I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to answer it, but I'll take a shot if no one else wants to.
I think I can try, Judy, if I understand it, and I think the question is, and I'll read this for everyone else. It says, seems like the nature of our government, a representative one, needs to be more poignantly considered and addressed. Sadly, the system allows for minorities' views to quote unquote win. So are there some thoughts as to how to connect with those specific communities that can make up the relevant electoral vote versus the majority of votes, which may or may not matter? And I think I have a couple of things to say here. And one is that my new friend on the chat earlier, I'm going to go find your name so I can call you out, that was recommending, making sure that you are engaging with like lots of small and hyper local organizations in addition to sort of big tent organizations. Those kinds of orgs are going to be doing the hard yards in terms of really connecting with all communities and making sure that people feel seen and heard and counted. But the other thing I want to just bring into the dialogue is a little bit of a rejection that we are our demographics, right? And I think something that there's nothing like a campaign to like dial you down to like height, race, age, eye color, what have you. And there is definitely correlation between our demographics and our worldview, but it's not a straight line. And I think some of the most interesting data that I have seen around this and that gives me hope is that, we get our attitudes about how we think the world should look from a whole bunch of different sources. And so for instance, and this is like hyper generalization, one of the things that we are seeing in demographics is a gut towards, like, let's say Latinx males and Black and African American males, for instance, that there is an energy from Trump and his sort of like decisive, here's how I go, I want to win things, that is appealing to parts of that life experience and puts that quote unquote demographic, if we understand it in a monolithic way, at risk for the party that has always sort of been heir apparent to that vote. And I think the lesson here is that, and I'm going to sound like I'm always the Pollyanna on any one of these panels, the less that we can mistake ourselves and our humanity for these kinds of demographics and the us and the them of it all, the better job we're going to do to like really create a society where everyone feels like they're counted and heard.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can I just add one little thing to that? I think especially when we're talking about, states where one voter's vote weighs a little more based on our electoral system, one of the things that I see happening a lot is, we have these reactions, and some people particularly, and I'm going to hyper generalize, but especially in our types of creative communities or coastal communities, something happens in the news cycle. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of performance on social media that is really high emotion, high energy. And I'm going to use the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, for example. And that turned into, The Handmaid's Tale was everywhere. And the way that reads in places like the Dakotas is that we hate religion. And so there's a lot of reasons to dislike her. You can talk about the fact that she consistently rules in favor of corporations over workers. You can talk about the fact that she thinks that people who are formerly incarcerated should not be able to vote, but should be able to have guns. Focusing on something like her religion sends a message in places where people's religion does play a large part in how they vote. So just being thoughtful about how we're thinking and talking about things that, can be used to make a case for or against something, within the spheres of influence that we have.
Thank you. I'm seeing a question in the comments section from Wendy Krettel. How do you explain that presidential vote matters when it is the electorate vote that counts? Winning popular vote did not work for Hillary. How does our vote impact the electorate? Anyone want to answer that one? Or I will try, although I don't feel the most qualified to answer it. I will try. My sense is this. I mean, I live in San Francisco. I don't pretend that, my vote is going to sway the presidential election for obvious reasons. I still vote. It's still important. There's a lot of down ballot races that can be affected, but, when it comes to the presidential election, not commenting on whether the electoral college should be abolished or not, which it should, it's a collective thing. It's our duty as citizens to preserve our democracy, to vote, period. And obviously it's a little strange to think that really this election might be, determined by a handful of states. And if you don't live in those states, if you live in the state of New York and you're voting Democrat, does it really matter? If you're living in, California and you're voting Democrat, it definitely, it might not matter. But I think it's more about the engagement, and it's about engaging the people around you to participate. That's my 2 cents. Anyone want to add to that?
And I think that we don't need to seed, things like patriotism and religion and all of these things that, we have to sort of what we've defined as red states. There's a lot of people who we can find that are values aligned in places that are traditionally known as red states. And I would love to see more effort from people who are focused on electing progressive candidates on finding ways to connect with voters that we've dismissed as just completely unable to bring across the board. The more that we do that, we're just sort of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And
I have one other.
It does matter for our cousins and extended family who live in battleground states. I mean, if people don't vote, then the electors, there is a correlation. Yeah, there's the popular vote, which is looking at the sum total of all of the votes everywhere. And then there's state by state what's happening, right? And, electors have to follow the will of that state, is how I understand our system works. And I believe that there was case law that was decided that supported that idea over the course of this past summer. So, if you have a state like Wisconsin, and there are, I also understand that at least 25,000 votes were suppressed, which was the margin by which Hillary lost Wisconsin, which means that we need to turn out the vote even more so in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia and North Carolina and Minnesota and, approximately 6 other states where it could be too close to call. So it does matter, it's not like the electoral system has its deficiencies, which is that it overrides the overarching will of the people. But we, the people, can undermine that possibility by encouraging everybody we know in every single state to get out and to vote and to participate in the system.
And I'm just I know I just told you not to pay too much attention to demographics, but just go with me here for 1 second, which is that we are majority multicultural in less than 10 years, right? Not in like 50 years, but in less than 10 years. So there's also the argument that I would make is first and foremost the necessary but not sufficient. You have to vote because it is your civic duty. You have to vote because you have to model the behavior of, like, if I work out more when the other people in my house are working out, right? So like the whole country needs to bring that energy to this election so that it feels like the thing to do. The other thing I would mention to you, believe in the possibility for the demographics of this country to change and for the Electoral College to move in our direction, because it is going in that direction. And we are more purple than we are blue and red in more places, more frequently, all the time, because of how this country is becoming actively always already more multicultural. And so if we immediately go into this belief that like we focus only on swing states without understanding the ability of some of these other states to become swing states right away, then we're sort of like getting off of this bus, I think, at a couple stops too early, right? And like that's a really in the weeds argument, but it's one that I've like made on the reg that I think for my more engaged friends works.
And Genevieve's point is important for another reason, which goes back in a way to Judy's question. And that's that as the demographics of the United States are changing, and as Hispanics and Blacks are becoming the majority of the population, if we continue to have large numbers of Black and Hispanic voters who feel disenfranchised, or who feel excluded from the system and who aren't participating in our system, then that means that the minority, you know, and I'm going to be explicit here, because I understand, I'm suspicious whenever I see that there's suddenly a debate between Blacks and Jews in the media. I'm always very suspicious of that, because we are natural allies of one another, right? So there's been there has been an effort to divide people who are natural allies in this country since the very beginning. All of the people who are impoverished, you know, like regardless of what their racial or religious background is. There's been an effort to find different ways, oftentimes using race, to divide people. And the reason for that is because the people who wish to remain dominant have always been in the minority. They will continue to be in the minority on a going forward basis because the demographics are shifting. But their power will increase because the minority has become the current minority has become so disaffected and feels so excluded and so outside of the system. And so that's why we have to start speaking in a language of compassion and understanding and hearing and listening, so that we can bring everybody back, because otherwise it's not going to be a representative democracy at all.
Yes, very good point. So I know we're already over our time. Does anyone, if anyone has any final thoughts to share before we log off? I just want to say thank you for everyone who tuned in. Thank you to my friends and fellow panelists. This has been really great. I've learned some things. And it's just so fun to hear you guys talk, because you're all so knowledgeable and motivating. So thank you.
Jordan, thanks for putting the group together. And Genevieve, Binta, Kathryn, Andy, really appreciate having you guys on. Everybody get out and vote, please. And as a reminder, we have another show this week. On Friday, we'll be meeting with Molly Newman for our Business of Music show. She's the president of Song Trust. So join us at noon Pacific on Friday with Molly. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.